Our next speaker has a passion for all things automation. Name a framework, he's probably not just used it, but probably teaches a course on it as well. But today he's here to introduce us to a testing specialization not many of us have probably been exposed to, ETL and data testing. Here to help us navigate this novel frontier, we have Pato Maina.
Cool. Thank you, everyone. Let's start with a story to put you in perspective and give you an idea on how I came up with ETL testing or how ETL testing came into my life. I got a job offer, and the job offer was fairly vague. It was saying something about Java, Spring Boot, okay, some data, SQL. And I went there. I was like, okay, I know how to do unit testing. I know most of the languages, API, mocking. I don't have any problem. Once I'm there, they are like, how will you do ETL testing for a data warehouse? I was like, what? Just goodbye. But the story ended with me getting the job because the tester mindset and how mentoring teams, it's something that they really liked. And they couldn't find anyone with experience in ETL testing. So that was my first thing to think when coming with ETL testing. So why are we not hearing about ETL testing? Why is ETL testing something that we don't speak in the testing community? Similar to game testing, for example, like the talk that we just had. And before coming with the introductions and all that, let me tell you that at the end of this talk, hopefully you will get a new niche, a new industry that you can start thinking of when getting into new tools, into new processes. I will give you some homework because the mic is giving me like teacher vibes, so I will give you something to investigate. And I was talking with Ryan, and he was super right. We have a lot of data warehouse work here in New Zealand, and with Microsoft Salesforce coming through, that will start happening more and more. So ETL is something that we should be paying attention as the testing community from New Zealand. That was not the button. I was testing it. You can see that I had maybe too much fun with AI image creation. I'm Patricio Maina. A couple of things about me. I'm a consultant test engineer here in New Zealand. I'm from Argentina, as you can tell maybe from the accent. I help companies and individuals through creative engineering. I mostly script, automate, and help feeding those loop of feedback that everyone loves in DevOps and making things easier for developers and testers alike. I teach also test engineering. I'm mentor from Free Range Testers. That's a community I have in Spanish, and starting with Dev Academy Aotearoa to start giving mentorships here in New Zealand as well. I'm also a dungeon master of a table, Dungeons and Dragons, with 2 BAs and 2 developers. That's crazy. So, first of all, data nowadays, like it or not, it's everywhere. Every time you make an appointment, every time you call your bank, every time you buy something, you do something, you're generating data points somewhere. But the same thing is with oil, right? Data is like the new oil, like I say here, but you need to extract the true value of it if you want to do something useful for it. If not, it's like throwing petroleum into a Renault or Ford Fiesta, and you won't get much of it. Testing and ETL plays a crucial role in ensuring that the quality of the data is there. And this happens way before any of the other testing that you might be aware of. This happens way before API testing, end-to-end testing. Anything you can think of is using that data to make things. So why not paying attention to the data that we are using for these systems? So these are the points that we will be covering today. We are going to see why ETL is important. We are going to see specific cases that I have been working on how ETL is applied, a notion of how ETL works as a process in data warehouses and what is expected from the tester. I will give you an introduction to Great Expectations, which is an open source Python library for ETL testing, because again, as ETL testing is not super popular, there are not many tools to automate ETL testing. So I think the only two that I because I had to investigate a lot to replace the automation framework that we have. Tosca was one, which is a paid tool, and Great Expectations is the other one. The name comes from a great book, so extra points for them. And then the differences that we have with other types of testing, which it's a good thing and a bad thing, because we need to put our tester hats, our tester mindsets, and start thinking how we can put quality into extract, transform, and load. ETL comes from those processes. How we can make sure that the quality of that is there. So, why is important ETL testing? The first of all the things, of course, is data quality assurance. We need to make sure that the quality that we are using for the data is there. ETL, to give you a big picture of how it works, I was saying that anything that you do, any of the interactions that you do probably today with businesses, with companies, online, is generating data. That data is put into different sources, different places, handling the interactions from YouTube, interactions from Google, interactions from different places. And then someone, a data scientist or business intelligence, say, hey, I think we need a promo for people that's doing this thing, this particular demographics with this tool between this range of ages. And that's when ETL comes into place. We have requirements saying, okay, we have these data points in these different sources. We need to apply this logic, transform the data, and load it into a table or view for those persons to make the right decisions. As you can see, the second point, decision-making, it's one of the main points. If you have a business, if you have a startup, if you have anything trying to make decisions based on data, you need to make sure that the data that you're using is reliable, is accurate, and it's there in terms of quality. Then you have regulations. Sometimes it's not something that the company wants, but maybe the government says, okay, we have COVID happening, we need to make sure that we are giving the right assistance for people who is having a hard time financially with this. So we will need from all the financial entities to produce this view, this data, and then we will have requirements saying, okay, we have these data sources, these columns here, we need to transform this data because they need it a little bit different, apply this logic, putting it to a table, and make that report happen. That's one of the big things here. Especially in Wellington, we have a lot of government ministries, and ETL is a big part of how decisions are made. System migration is another one. When we are moving data from A to B, we need to make sure that that's happening accordingly to the requirements, that we are transforming and applying and loading everything. We're not missing, duplicating, or screwing up the data, basically. Performance optimization is another one. We need to make sure that the queries that we are using to make the logic happen is there in terms of speed, that they are not loading forever, that they are not taking too much time. And proactive BART resolution is another one because, again, data comes before API end-to-end testing, so we will find those issues happening way before all those other types of testing are happening. ETL is one type of functional testing. We have functional and non-functional. ETL is one of them. So that's something to take in mind because usually when we talk about functional testing, ETL doesn't appear that much there on the list. So the first thing I thought when I joined that team was, okay, I know how to test. We have the pyramid of automation, let's say. We have unit test, integration test, end-to-end test. But this is data, so there is no end-to-end testing. And we have queries to Teradata or SQL Server, how unit testing works exactly with this. So the conceptions that we have from the normal, or let's say the more spread notion of testing changes a little bit when we talk about ETL testing. Even the reporting is different, and we will see that later when we see how we report on ETL testing. So one of the key things here is to forget everything you know about testing in terms of how you do unit API end-to-end, because nothing will be exactly the same for ETL testing. For example, unit testing will be just checking those blocks for queries. A unit, you know, in system, in normal object-oriented programming, you're testing the logic of a function, for example, isolated from all the other systems. In terms of data, you don't have functions exactly in a class. You have queries happening, you have tables, you have views. So you have to start thinking in a different way. Unit testing happens the same thing. We mock data, and we will see how can we analyze what data to feed, because we are dealing with huge amounts of data that we need to test from production, from the real places. And as testers, we need to sit down, talk with the BAs for the requirements, with the devs, and say, okay, we have these requirements here. Why are we not considering this type of data? Or what is going to happen when I do this? I remember one case in which we had a special character that was exploding pretty much everything when we were trying to transfer that data from the source to the target. So the tester mindset, the tester hat, it's really useful in terms of you need to have that curiosity, you need to have that initiative of asking questions and saying, what if? What if we do this? What if we have this kind of data? Especially because, again, when you try to pick up data for testing, when you mock data for ETL testing, it's really difficult to come up with all the scenarios. We have in production, we may have, I don't know, 10 of thousands of entries, and it's really difficult to separate into groups. And we will see that there is something called data profiling that it's really useful, and that the tool that I will give you for investigation later helps a lot. The tool in question here is Great Expectations. It's an open source library. It uses Python. It doesn't require a lot of knowledge in terms of programming. And it simplifies the complex task of ETL. When I joined this team, we had a huge framework with Java, with Spring Boot. We had some libraries to connect to the database. And it was like a Frankenstein of things happening there. And the results were there, but they were not super there because we were using TestNG. If you're familiar, sorry, this is about to get a little bit technical, but TestNG is a tool to say test case is passing, test case is failing. And in the term of ETL, it's not exactly the same because we need to say, we have this percentage of quality on the data, we have this percentage of unexpected values on this column. So it's not exactly the same as saying test case passing, test case failing, and we need to communicate different. As I said, it's an open source, so you can download it after the conference. I invite you, I will put the links on the Discord server. And it does all the heavy lifting for you. So when working in ETL, in my case, was maintaining this huge Framat Java framework with Spring Boot, TestNG, other libraries to connect to the database, connecting to CSV to mock the data. It was a lot of things happening to maintain that was not really sustainable. So we had to find a solution. When trying to find a solution in the investigation, I was, okay, there must be a lot of ETL tools, right? Because data warehouses, data is pretty much everywhere. So there must be a lot of things. No. There is not much. Actually, I found just two tools. One of them was Tosca, and the other one was this one. This one is free, so of course I went with the free option. And this is a big picture of what Great Expectations does for you. So once you have the tool up and running, which is initializing it, you have all the methods and everything in place to connect to your data, being it a CSV, a data frame, a database in different, it has connections for different SQL Server, data, different options that you can do. And then Great Expectations will handle pretty much everything for you. It will create the expectations, it will create the reports, and you have the live documentation of what are you expecting from your data and how is that running against the checkpoints. We will see in more detail what each of these things are. But the important thing from here is that the tool provides you with the context for doing ETL automation properly. And I say ETL automation and not testing because, again, you are dealing with a huge amount of data. You cannot be just going one by one on the rows and making sure that that is happening. It is true that as a tester, the true value of your work is analyzing what are you expecting from your data and just making sure that, but by the point that you automate that, you know exactly which requirements you're covering, what things were not covering the requirements, and what is the true value for the data scientist or business intelligence. So this is a report. It generates HTML reports. And there are a couple of funny things here that you will see. So it has how many expectations? Expectations will be like test cases, to put a version of it from the normal testing world. But you can see that there is a column here called observed value, and it has a 0% of unexpected values there. We can see that the expectation was values must belong to this set, and we have a set of numbers there. And this is one of the key things when you are doing ETL testing and ETL programming, is that you need to report on the quality of the data. Same thing with the oil. I don't know, for some reason I like to compare data with oil. Yes. It's the same thing, because sometimes when doing quick prototypes, depending on what you are working, especially with regulations, things that you need to make fast, fail fast, you will say, okay, how many unexpected value percentage are we expecting? And maybe the business says, okay, we need this to happen fast, so we don't really care at this point that we have 30% of unexpected values for this expectation, so we are good to go. Which is different from presenting a test NG or a report, an automated report saying this test case is failing. How many of the data is failing? Maybe it's 0.01% of the data failing, and that's good for the business. Which as a tester sounds weird, right? Because if you see something failing, it's like, this is not ready to go. But again, testing is about communicating the state of things to help people making the decisions, make the decisions based on the right data. So this is one of the core differences that we find between regular testing and ETL testing. On top of the pyramid of automation and all the processes that we may have as testers being completely different. Unit testing is not quite there, it's not the same. We don't have API testing because there is no API here. And end-to-end testing doesn't work that much because we don't have user flows here. It's just data being transformed from A, B, C to C, D, E from another place. So we need to start thinking in a different way. Here, for this experiment I did with Great Expectations, I downloaded, and I invite you to do it, CSV. You can find a lot of data CSV from New Zealand that you can download, and you can create expectations against it. All this is generated automatically. You have the checkpoints, which are the executions that you have. Again, you can connect this against CSV files, you can connect this against your data frames, and you can I think you can mock data as well, which is a huge part of how you do unit testing, and I will come back to that in a second. So, how many of you know Python? Just out of curiosity, in the testing community here. Okay, that's good. That's good. You don't need a lot of Python, so you can try it out. Again, you can download it. I will leave the link. But let's go through how this works exactly. Once you set up this package, you can create your data context. The data context in this context, it's basically the skeleton of your project. It will create all the skeleton with everything you need to connect to the data sources, to create the running suites, to create the test cases, which again, test cases in this case is expectations, and then to create the runners for those. And one of the interesting bits is that you can complement this with Airflow. I don't know if you have heard of Airflow for a schedule. It's a scheduler. In data warehouses, again, it's really, really useful to make things happen in terms of ETL and data logic and extracting and loading into different tables and views. So it has a really good synergy, not that much with things like Jenkins or Azure DevOps pipelines, but it works really well. So another of the differences that we have with regular testing, how we create expectations, right? We have data from different places. We have the business intelligence team saying, okay, we need this set of data. I don't know, and I don't care from where you get it. I need this data to be presented in this particular way. So that's how the requirement usually looks like. Then You will have the developers, business analysts, and the testers saying, okay, we know that this data comes from here, but it's not quite in the state that business intelligence wants this. So we need to change this with logic and do these changes before we load it in the target table. So in that sense, you need to know a lot of the domain and how things work in your data warehouses. And data profiling is one of the main techniques that you will use to come up with tests, right? Because running expectations or test cases for ETL will be as good as the test cases that you have and against which data that you are going to run this test. What I'm meaning is that if you grab 10% of production data, it might not be that relevant because it's not the diversity that you want, it's not the set of data that you might want. And in that case, doing mocks is what it's the best approach before doing the actual test on the final target table. So having, again, that tester mindset, the tester hat, and saying, okay, we have these expectations, we have this logic, what happens when we have this data, for example, in the database, and what happens if we don't have this, or if this is changed slightly. So all those cases are stuff that you are coming up as a tester, thinking critically how to test this. And one of the good things that you have with this tool in particular is that it provides you a data profiler. A data profiler, in terms of ETL, is something that will help you saying this data is relevant and I'm expecting this column, for example, to be this way, to be unique, to not have any duplicates. It should be a date format. So the data profiling works basically by feeding, let's say again, the 10% of data from production. You can feed that into the profiler, it will iterate, and it will generate what I call a draft of test cases or expectations that you will analyze as a tester and say, okay, this looks like what we want to test. This is not right there, this is not correct. We can have this other type of value for this attribute. And this serves as a really good kickstart because, again, we're dealing with a lot of data, a lot of possible different scenarios, and the data profiler, it's a really good baseline to start thinking in how to test that. So these are a couple of different ways that you can create expectations. One of them is user domain knowledge. Maybe you are an expert in the data warehouse, you already know exactly from where this is coming and where it's going and why it's going there. So you can create your own test cases. In a similar fashion, if you're aware of Karate, DCL, you have like pre-made expectations that you can use in the same thing. Or you can do this introspection and have the profiler helping you. You can run the profiler against 50, 60,000 rows, and it will say, okay, these are the expectations based on the data that you fed. This is what we need to test. Again, that's a baseline. Don't take that as the final thing, but it's a really good approach. The checkpoints are the runners. So similar to what we have when doing automation, we have runners. We can batch different suites of expectations that we have and run those through the validation and the checkpoints, and it will produce, first of all, an HTML report, and you can hook it with Slack, with emails, and send notifications. You can use different sets of data. Again, CSV files, SQL database, Spark data frame, Teradata. In the case of New Zealand, there is a lot of Teradata work, SQL Server as well. You can use local file systems, CSV files, S3 buckets, in-memory. All that is something that you can use. I suggest you to download the CSV from any NCED stats or from wherever you want. I tried with the NASA one, pretty cool, and come up with all the expectations that you may think, and then critically think if those expectations are correct or not. Usually, it's a good baseline, but it's not quite there. And this is what I was saying previously, like documentation, similar as Cucumber, Gherkin, but more useful. You have exactly what are you expecting from the data that you are producing and how much of the values are unexpected or not. You have the schema validation for the tables. It's a really good document to share, and it's providing the level of detail that you may not have with TestNG or the other tools that are not suitable for this kind of testing. Here we can see this checking the different columns that we have, how many data, if we move everything correctly, if we have all the values move as we expected from one table to the other, if the logic is there. And we can see that we have 97% of success, which may be enough for some businesses, for others not. So the conclusion for this, I wanted to talk about a niche that I feel as testers we don't know much about. And as I was talking with recruiters, ETL testers are being demanded in the market. And usually we don't have the knowledge or the skills to get those jobs. And sometimes we end up with those jobs, like me, and we have to learn about those. But if you're prepared, it's even better. So I invite you to just grab your laptops after the conference, download the package, and try it out with any set of data that you may find, and just share on the Discord how it goes. We can have a conversation there. Thank you.